Thomas, what do you observe this season about modern paintings at auction?
Hello, Judith. Yes, just got back from New York. I think there were a lot of expectations this season post the US elections, hoping that the market would pick up again and that collectors would show in greater numbers than we've seen in the past. We had sort of a rough ride, I think, this fall with the Hong Kong, London, and Paris auctions, which gave mixed results and showed quite a limited numbers of bidders. So we were hoping that it was going to be better in New York, and it was. It was with very strong prices. I think everybody has heard by now that the Magritte sold for $121 million, that the Ed Ruscha fantastic painting sold for almost $70 million. And these were encouraging results, but it remained patchy and it remained quite difficult. I think mostly because there were more lots than usual that came to the auction naked, meaning without a guarantee.
Really?
Yes, quite a bit.
Like what?
Like for example, the Picasso portrait of François Gillot, like the Ruscha, wasn't guaranteed. Like most of the Seidel Miller collection was not guaranteed. And it showed in the percentage sold in the evening sales. They sold about 72 and 76% instead of the usual 92% sold because of irrevocable bids from third-party guarantee. So there were more exposed lots, and therefore the percentage of lots sold was less than in past season, and yet there were more bidders. It was more active than it has been in the past, and that's quite encouraging, I think, for the upcoming seasons.
And there were some disappointment.
Yes, there were some disappointing.
A shift in the market, right?
I beg your pardon?
A shift in the market.
Definitely a shift in the market, definitely a concentration on certain lots, and other lots being more difficult to selling, a shift in taste. I think as far as shifts in taste, the best example that I could think of was the French Mark from 1913, the long yellow horse, which had an estimate of $8 to $12 million, which sort of made sense because French Mark died very young, and he's an extremely rare artist, and his yellow horses are amongst the best subject. And although it carried a low estimate of $8 million, it sold for 3.8 hammer, 4.3 with fees. So hammering less than half the low estimate, which would have been unheard of, I think, 10 years ago. And it reflects a shift in the market, a market that was always very narrow of expressionists.
Yes, that's the point, right, about this market.
Exactly, too narrow, and these buyers are gone, and I guess French Mark didn't interest the buyers as much as it did a while ago. So that's a definite shift because it's a very, very low price for one of his great subjects. So that was disappointing, and it shows a little bit that certain sectors of our market need to be rethought completely, and estimates need to be lower. I was also saddened to see that the balcony, which was a lovely little painting by Gustave Caillebotte, with a composition typical of Caillebotte, framed and of an outdoor view of the Paris streets, carried an estimate of $4 to $6 million, remain unsold. And that's really interesting because there's no doubt that, as you know, there's a current retrospective or a current show of Caillebotte at the Musée d'Orsay, which will be traveling to Chicago and to the Getty. And the Caillebotte has had a second win, if I can say. He had a renewed market since the Cox collection sold in 2021, where there was the Man on the Balcony that fetched $53 million, purchased by the Getty. And since that sale, in the last 3 years, we've seen what I would call secondary Caillebottes overestimated and not selling. So unfortunately, Caillebotte has a very divided production, and you have to be very careful in your pricing. And if you're too aggressive, which would have been justified because of that 2021 price, then you fail to sell.
But this one was cool. It was really a cool painting. It's like if Caillebotte was waiting for the character to come on the balcony.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there was a very similar composition that was purchased about 10 years ago by the Musée van Gogh in Amsterdam for $2.5 million. So that's also, the estimate. I saw the painting in New York and I really liked, as you did, the subject. But when you saw it in the flesh, it was very sketchy. It was not sketchy in a spontaneous way. It was sketchy in an unfinished kind of way. And as a matter of fact, the signature wasn't Caillebott's signature. It was the estate signature.
So it means it could not have been achieved.
Yes, of course, it was not a completed. I think it was a more of a study for his balcony scenes. And it remained unsold because I think it wasn't finished enough. And I think one needs to be really careful when they're valuing Caillebott and make sure they take into account how finished it is and the subject matter, of course, and be more reasonable in the estimate because the interest is certainly there. And it's a shame that we've seen a succession of Caillebotts remaining unsold.
What about Picasso?
Well, that's an interesting point. I think Picasso, Monet, Van Gogh, Magritte have been a bit of the pillars of the market and the auction market during these difficult seasons that we've been living for 18 months. And Picasso has been always the go-to man as super reliable. And this time around, there were many of them, maybe too many, shared between Sotheby's and Christie's, and a lot of them failed to sell. I'm thinking notably of The Woman with a Cat that carried a very hefty estimate of $7 to $10 million that had to be withdrawn at the last minute at Sotheby's for lack of interest. There was also, I think, at Christie's, a Musketeer estimated 12 to 18 that failed to sell. So that's very unusual. I don't think it reflects on the artist himself, but rather on the selection of works that were from different periods, but they were all a bit difficult and not decorative enough and not powerful enough to sustain the estimate, and therefore they remain unsold.
It's the price of the past. They
yes.
correspond to prices of the past.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a pricing or if it's I think it's more of a subject issue than pricing. But certainly for these more difficult subjects or less obviously decorative subjects, one needs to be more careful going forward with estimates. And Picasso is Picasso, so he will always come back. But it was surprising and certainly very worrying for the auction house, who no longer can rely on Picasso as they have been able to do so for the past seasons.
But what about the Mousquetaire? The subject normally is popular, right?
Absolutely. These late, large pictures of Mousquetaire are usually pretty sought after. But if you look at the bigger prices that were achieved for these subjects, they were usually very colorful, i.e. with a palette of red, yellow, and oranges. And this one was more in the purple, green, brown palette, which made it less attractive. And I think the estimate of 12 to 18 was simply discouraging. So nobody stepped up to the plate. That's also the problem when you have these large seasons like we've had in New York, where you're given to buyers so much choice to bid on other things. So unfortunately, there were clearly more interesting lots in the sale, and this one failed to convince anyone.
Bon, merci, monsieur.
Merci beaucoup, Judith. Merci.